Well, if you are at all connected in the world of music at all, then you have heard of a band that's been rock starring it all over the world since the 80s. And they played here in town on Friday night, U2. And they're doing their Joshua Tree tour. And the Joshua Tree was a record that they put out 30 years ago, in 1987. 30 years ago. And they're doing that this year. They're doing a Joshua Tree tour. And what's important to know about this isn't that the band is awesome or that they've got X number of albums or that they have been playing for 30 years. What's significant about this album and this record is so much. I mean, for me, it parallels, when it came out, it was sort of a soundtrack in the background of my life. I gave my life to Christ that year. And there were songs on this record that were life-giving, really powerful lyrically. There were songs like In God's Country. There were songs like, let's see. I Still Haven't Found What I'm Looking For. Listen to this record. If you're a music person, go find it and listen to it and let it speak to you. I Still Haven't Found What I'm Looking For is powerful because this band is a group of guys who are Christians, and they were able to sort of put into words that not only do they, as Christians, what have been looking for, they're still not finding. They've found the Lord, they found Jesus, but what they're really looking for is kingdom come, where everything is ultimately good forever and ever. But I think the other thing that's important about this record is the name Joshua Tree. Do you know what Joshua Tree is? Well, if you look at the album, there's a picture of a tree on it. But the backstory to this is even more compelling. The band was driving in the mid-'80s, sort of in probably late '86, and they were driving in California across part of the desert of California, right near Death Valley. And one of the guys in the group, who was sort of the creative genius behind this record, saw this tree from a distance. And they called it the Joshua Tree. Joshua Tree is actually the name of the community that they were driving through. And so they stopped, they went over and they looked at this, and they were all kind of dumbfounded. And what's important for me in this moment is to recognize, not only was it a cool tree, that the tree's now gone. The area is sort of this mecca for U2 fans from all over the world. They go, they show up, there's a box that you can put your letter in or your tickets hi, I saw this tour in China or in Asia or in South America. Really neat. But what's important and sort of profound is that this Joshua Tree moment for them changed the direction of the record's marketing. That record was supposed to be called The Two Americas. And there was some political stuff in there, some critiques of part of American life, but there was also the reality of the suffering and of everyday Americans in need of something more. So they named this record Joshua Tree. And if you think about it, and this is what hit me over the weekend, this record is life-giving. Listen to it. The lyrics in all of the songs lead you to a place, a better place than where you stand, a place of hope, a place of life. And the fact that record was renamed in Joshua Tree, right next to the Death Valley, kind of gets me. What happens in Death Valley? What's the story that we associate with Death Valley? Death. And yet something that is life-giving was sort of born right in that place. Death, life, what's the story going to be? They changed the narrative of Death Valley in that day. And they made life the main character in that story by renaming that record Joshua Tree. So this morning what I want to talk to you about are maybe two terms that we might put in that place, the two terms for our lives are chaos and peace. And I think that we could make a list of the things that sort of lead us to chaos, or the things that we normally associate with chaos, and the things that we normally associate with peace. It's a very short list, but you know what I'm talking about. We normally think of things like, when we think of chaos, disorder, disaster, sickness, things that are supposed to work and they don't work. That causes chaos. Unrest, inner turmoil, the unexpected bad surprise that throws you off and takes the train off the tracks. We know what that's like too. Negative unpredictability. This all leads to chaos and a sense of dis-ease, if you will. Now, the other part of that is we know what peace is, and we associate sort of the opposite list of words when we think of peace. Let's just go through that. There's a lack of conflict, perhaps. Things might seem calm. Things work. Things are ordered. 2 + 2 is 4. You can count on that. There's no crazy math involved. Health. Surprises are good. They don't throw you off. In fact, they might even create more stability. So I have 2 little stories to kind of to go deeper in this. The first one is a trip I had to Africa when I was in seminary. In fact, St. Michael was a sponsor of this trip, and I was supposed to go representing St. Michael and my seminary, and I was going to visit with some refugees from the Sudan. The lost boys that we had here had families in a community that were in a refugee camp called Kakuma. And so I raised a lot of money. I had $8,000 in my pocket and planned this trip for months and months. Very ordered of me, right? And I was supposed to go make a difference. The Sudanese folks that came through my seminary said, "Come, we just need you to come so that people don't think that the church has forgotten them." That in itself is powerful. That's a message of love and hope that the church should be about. And I said, okay, so we go. But everything about this trip was the most chaotic thing. I should actually write a book and have this be a movie, because I got free tickets, but my friend said, "You have to go tomorrow instead of 3 days from now because of the non-revenue, blah, blah, blah. Seats aren't available when I told you, so get your stuff and go." And so there was this hurried, chaotic moment, and that kept up for 8 weeks. I mean, everything from taxis breaking down, I'm pushing them in the middle of Nairobi, to buses being started with a rope like a lawnmower and sagging in the back. And you know, the Africans were even upset by that, and that's got to tell you something. Death, bad things. The whole trip was chaotic. In fact, I was supposed to be able to go to this refugee camp, and there was a UN list. And I didn't know there was a UN list until we're halfway there. And the guys with us said, "We've got this list. We have it with us. Do you want to be on it?" I said, "Sure." "How?" "Well, just write your name at the bottom." So we got out a pencil. I wrote my name at the bottom of this UN list. And when we got to the gate, I just pretended that was normal. I said, "Here you go, we're on the list." And they said, "Come on through." That's not order. That's chaos. The car that we were in was held up by bandits the day after that. Unpredictability. There was a bus that I and my group were supposed to be on to take us somewhere else. And we were supposed to be on this bus, and at the last minute somebody said, "We have an SUV. Why don't you get in with us and we'll take you there. You'll save a couple hours." We did that. But the bus went on its way and had a head-on collision. And almost everyone in that bus perished. That's chaos. That's not order. Crazy chaos, unsettling chaos. And yet, I got sick at the refugee camp and had to go back to Nairobi early, and a turning point happened right here. Listen to this. I'm back in my room, and I've got all this money. I'm supposed to go help buy books for a guy to take back to Sudan. And so he's a Sudanese priest. And he comes, and I'm just sick. I'll spare you the details. But the kind of sick where I can't really move, and it's just not good, and I think I might die, and I ate some bad goat. And goat is just a term for you don't know what you just ate. Oh. And so I answered my door in the Anglican guest house in my room. He came up, and I said, I can't go. I'm sorry. In fact, I need to sit down. I'm about to faint. And he said, okay, get back in bed. And I was in the middle of my big, long apology. Maybe we can go tomorrow. Maybe we can go 2 days from now. I've got this. And he goes, shh. Let me tell you something, brother. Where I come from, we have a prayer. The prayer is this: God, make me sick so I know who my friends are. I'm your friend. Go to sleep. And he sat with me and took care of me for about the next 6.5, 7 hours. And then the rest of the trip, what I was able to see that I hadn't been able to see before this, there was something in the middle of their life, in the middle of their chaos, in the middle of the death and challenges that they had, that was bigger than the chaos. They were Christians, and so their relationship with God, when they said the Lord's Prayer, give us this day our daily bread, not only did they mean it, it was part of the joy that they had when they did find something to eat that day. And then it opened my eyes to the bigger story. I saw the most suffering Christians I've been around, and yet they always had something to offer me, hospitality. They'd find a Fanta in the middle of where they lived in the countryside, a cold Fanta. How was it cold? I don't know. There was food. There was hot water for me to bathe in at night. How? Well, because they had charcoal and they made a trip to a mile away to get the water. There were songs of joy every night before we went to bed. Brother, let us sing, thanking God for another day. And so every night we sang. And then on Sunday, oh my gosh, the most powerful lyrics, and I'll call it liturgy. The whole church was singing and swaying back and forth. There was this 3 or 4 part harmony. Hands came up into the air. It was not a performance. It was something that was inside of them that came out. It was pure elation and joy because the main character in their life, the protagonist, was joyful. There was peace. It was Jesus. Amazing, amazing. It turned everything upside down for me. I saw in the morning one time, I went for a run, and I could hear from the night before they had these long funerals. People had been dying in the surrounding villages, had been dying of AIDS. I didn't know that till I asked, but there were these lamenting sort of songs that would go on all night. And I remember hearing one of those songs and seeing a pastor come from one of those services or evenings all night long. The pastor's there with them, and he was dressed up. He was dressed up in this green suit. But it didn't look quite right because he was on the back being pumped on a bicycle. The most dignified man I saw in Africa was being pumped on a bicycle. And I later met him, and I said, how is it here? And he said, very hard. This is the valley of the shadow of death. And then he finished the psalm. And he said, we're glad you're with us. Let us have a prayer. So the main character in their lives was peace. And it was bigger than the biggest chaos that you can imagine that was in the rest of their lives. So I went a little long on that story. The other story is I left there. I feel like I made it out alive. And I went straight to Switzerland. I went into Montreux to the jazz festival there. And the first day was amazing because I got to take a shower. I got to have a salad. Even the Swiss salads were good, and they're not normally very good. I got to have rest. The train was quiet. There was rain, giving life to crops as opposed to no rain. So imagine no rain in Africa, hot, dusty, brown, tan, burned up, green, rain, and from a distance, the most beautiful thing I saw, from the top of the mountain were crops. 10 different colors of perfect ordered squares next to each other. I cried because of the beauty of order. And so there were some other things that were happening there too. One of my friends at the Swiss airport fell getting off the train and caught her foot between the platform and the train itself and gashed it. And she was stuck. And that bag was too heavy. I wasn't there for this, but this is a real story. And she said that no one in her tears and her cries for help would help her. These disinterested Swiss and others just walked right by. In perfect, ordered, Swiss timing Switzerland, there was no rescue for her. Nobody came out to help. All the people just sort of walked over her, literally stepped over her. And then finally the train conductor said, "Move! Get up and get out of the way. I have a schedule to keep." And finally it was another tourist, who sort of saw what was happening, grabbed the bag, flung it over. But even that tourist vanished. And so this friend of mine had to wrap her ankle in the bathroom. And so there were several of us that went up the mountain to this Christian community there. And it was a beautiful place. Maybe the most beautiful place I've ever been. Overlooking the Lake of Geneva with those crops. The beauty. Really amazing. And yet here we were, a group of Christians and non-Christians who'd come to this place to try to figure out life. This great Christian community. And yet this was a group full of folks without peace running their story. There were people who were suicidal. There were people who were just sad and depressed. Some were Christians, some not. And I stopped and I thought, chaos and peace aren't mutually exclusive. Life is messy. But here I am in maybe one of the wealthiest countries in the world, most beautiful, ordered, clean, all of that. You could eat. Seriously, I thought about kissing the ground when I got there. And yet, compare the two. In a place like Africa where there's nothing but death and suffering, there was joy. There was hospitality. At the offering at church, the whole church couldn't wait to line up. And I thought, what's happening? I didn't even know. I'd never seen anything like that. Oh, this is the offering. I go, where are they going? They're lining up. They lined up out the back. And I said, what's going to happen? These people don't have money. Watch what they end up giving. At the front, after everybody got through, you'd have wept. Because it was a little bit of money, but there was rice, there was grain, there were a few vegetables, there was whatever they had that they could offer to the Lord. They said, this is the time to give thanks and give back. Holy cow. And so you compare these two stories, the chaos and the peace in Africa versus the outward appearance of peace, but utter chaos of Switzerland. Those are two very real things. I will say this, it does matter what your story is, who the protagonist is in your story. And you know, it's easier if your protagonist is peace, for there to be even chronic chaos and disorder in your life. But it's a lot harder if your main character, if the protagonist in your life is actually chaos, and that is what your life is about, and that's it. It's harder to experience that joy. And so in one respect, we choose. Jesus came so that we could choose Him to be our protagonist. And just like what we see in Africa, choosing to be a Christian, choosing to follow Jesus, and in the 30 years I've been actively following Him, it hasn't meant that my life's gotten easier. Sometimes it's gotten harder. Or it means that you can be in Africa, or in Dallas, or in Death Valley, and be faced with the same thing. The question is, who do you want to be your protagonist? If you want Jesus to be your protagonist, that's great. You have to say yes to that, and you have to actively say, come on, be the main character in my story. It's why he came. But all the things that Jesus is, and we're in John, man, don't get me started. The 7 I am statements, the Prince of Peace, the light of the world, the bread of life, go down the list. All of those things do not matter if you don't say yes to them. His attributes, how great he is, how much he loves you, that's all good. But if you don't say, yes, I want you to be the main character of my story, it doesn't really do much for you. We're not talking about heaven. We're talking about right now. So this is a day just to reflect. We have the benefit of celebrating a wonderful Memorial Day in a wonderful church. I love this church. I can't say thank you enough for sending me on that trip. Some of you were involved in that. Because it allowed me to sort of frame chaos and peace. So the question at the end of this, go back to you two in the desert. In the middle of Death Valley where there's death, there's no life, there's no water, and for many there's no hope. What was the response? The band's response was to say yes to the Prince of Peace, and they made a record that ultimately it ultimately led one to peace, this guy. So our question is, we're going to say yes to the Prince of Peace, and if we are, let's just do it. Together as a church, we do it. Individually, when we go home, we do it. At the best of times, when we're celebrating birthdays and Memorial Day, we do it. And when we're facing the hardest things you've ever faced, we do it. The difference is Jesus says, I got you. I'm here. I'm right in the middle of your story, and ultimately it's going to be okay.